Hey, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for giving time this evening to join us for our community information session about this year's or next year's budget. And if do you mind advancing the slide, please, Jim? So with me tonight for your panel, I am Joanne Klebb. For those of you who don't know me, I lead the city's public engagement program. With me are Jim Bauer, our General Manager of Finance and Administration and Chief Financial Officer. And we also have Angela Campbell, our Manager of Finance. And for those of you who heard James mention it earlier, we do have news in that Jim Bauer is going to be leaving the city at the end of the month. And we're very fortunate to have such a deep leadership team. And we have Angela Campbell will be the acting General Manager of Finance and Administration, and will see us through this financial planning process until we've completed our recruitment process. So thank you, Jim, for your excellent service, and thrilled to have Angela here to help steer the ship. Okay, can I get the next one? Okay, so before I get started on these community sessions, I do like to do a land acknowledgement. I want you just to take a quick look at this map. I don't know how many of you have seen this before, but this is the Syilx territory, and you can see Penticton is just a dot in there. And so we are fortunate to be located on the traditional territory of the Syilx Nation, and we're pleased that we're able to bring tonight's meeting from the traditional lands. I also want to mention that I think it'd be remiss if we didn't take a moment just to acknowledge our fellow Okanagan residents who are struggling tonight with the emergencies and the evacuations in Merritt and those affected in Princeton and Tulameen. Our thoughts and prayers are definitely with them as they deal with this difficult time. Oh, and actually, before I carry on from there, I was remiss in making a few very important introductions tonight. So in addition to our panel of Jim and Angela, we're also very fortunate to have such great representation from our council. As you can see, we've got Mayor Vasilaki here, we've got Councillor Rieger and Councillor Sentes, and we're also very fortunate to have our CAO, Donnie Van Dyke, on the line. And we have additional staff. We have Philip Cooper from our communications department, and Courtney Jones, another of our financial analysts. So we've got some really great people on the line to help answer your questions tonight. And so our format today is to have a presentation with the questions at the end. Jim has a presentation. It's about 15, 20 minutes, and it's just a lot easier if he can kind of take you through the story of this year's financial plan before we turn to questions. But what that does mean is that you can, as soon as these questions pop into your mind, I ask that you enter them into the chat. We use the chat function to kind of curate the discussion. It works really well at putting people into a queue so that we can answer your questions as they're suggested. So make sure that you have your chat function open so you can see, you can enter your questions, and that you can also see what other people are asking. As you can see on the screen, we do suggest your cameras are on. As panelists, it can be pretty tricky just to stare at a screen of black tiles. So if you're open to having your cameras on, it sure is great for the presenters. And as I mentioned before, we'll keep your microphones off unless you're going to address the group. You can enter your questions in the chat. You can also request to address the group. We're more than happy to have you, share your thoughts directly with staff and with council. And if you could just, I think I've got a couple of more bullets on there, Jim. And so one thing that's really important tonight, and one of the things that I love about these sessions, is that we do tend to hear from so many different perspectives, which makes these things really fantastic. Sometimes it's hard to hear that other people don't agree with us, but it's what makes these things successful, and it's what makes Penticton great. So we just want to make sure that we're really respectful of other people's comments, and that we're open and hearing other people's viewpoints. And then, as I mentioned, if you do have any questions or comments to share, you can also enter them in the chat. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to you, Jim. Oh,
Okay, well,
yeah, there
thanks so
was one
much.
more bullet there. Sorry. Sorry, Jim.
Oh,
The last
you want to?
bullet says taking turns on questions. This is important. We have a group of 36 people, and when you have that many, we need to make sure that everyone gets a turn. So if we start seeing a lot of questions in the threads, we'll usually limit it to kind of one per person as we go through the cycle, and then we'll wrap up and you'll get another turn. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Joanne, and good evening, everyone. And it's my pleasure to provide a little bit of an overview for those that are participating on the call tonight. And what I'm going to talk about is four things. I'm going to provide a few budget highlights of the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan. Talk about utility rates, talk about tax rates, and then I think most importantly, open it up for questions that anyone has. So in terms of from an overall overview perspective, the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan, specifically in 2022, the budget includes proposed revenues of $127 million. And then $107.3 million in expenses. And it's important to note that both of these figures are net of the $23 million in taxes that we collect on behalf of other taxing authorities. And as you can see from a revenue breakdown perspective, the electrical utility generates the greatest single amount of revenue, followed by taxation at $40 million. And then turning to our expenses, our general operations makes up the largest single portion of $59.3 million, followed by our electric utility at $37.9 million. Turning specifically to our general fund, what's proposed in the 2022 budget is general revenues of $62.9 million, with taxation making up the single largest portion of $40 million. And then turning to the general expenses, it's proposed $59.3 million. And as you can see, the single largest area is really our protective services, and that includes the the RCMP, fire, and bylaw, which makes up about 40% of the city's proposed budget. Here again, both of these overall figures are net of the $23 million in taxes that we collect on behalf of other agencies. When you look at the 2022 draft budget, we were faced with a number of significant financial challenges. First, inflation is running extremely high, and so we are having to manage and contend with these significant inflation rates, which I'll show how it transposes in a moment. We also have some sustained losses, so we certainly have not seen the rebounding of some of our revenue sources that we had anticipated and hoped, coming out of the COVID pandemic. And then thirdly, with regards to the community safety issues that exist in the community, there's a number of initiatives that have been identified as priorities, and certainly earlier in fall, Council, through the notice of motion process, voted on a number of priorities that they would like to see included in the budget. So the combination of these three things are really what's driving a higher tax increase than what we normally would be putting forward. So in terms of looking at those three things, and what it translates to is an overall funding shortfall that we were faced with in 2022. And as you can see, about $800,000 pertains to the inflationary costs associated with our collective agreements and our labor cost for the city. In addition, the RCMP contract is a fairly sizable increase. They did not have an agreement in place since 2016. They recently settled that earlier this summer. Works out to about a 23.8% increase over that period of time. And while we were making some provisions for that, it was not as significant as what the the outcome was, and so we have to deal with essentially shoring up that contract increase for another for another $700,000, and then we have some further sustained losses, and this really relates to revenue that has not recovered from our recreation services. So many of the things that take place at the community center, we're still seeing a reduced amount of revenue. In addition, the events and other functions at the South Okanagan Events Center and the Trade and Convention Center are not anticipated to return in the coming year to that the level that we saw pre-pandemic. And then lastly, we are also experiencing some reductions with regards to transit revenue. In addition, there are some commitments that previously were made by council. Primarily, this this pertains to public safety priorities, just with regards to the addition of additional RCMP members over the past year, as well as the hiring of an additional firefighter. And then through the notice of motion process, there's about $1.6 million in priorities that were identified. This primarily relates to the additional RCMP officers that have been proposed, as well as longer hours for our bylaw services and the addition of community safety officers. Then there are a number of other critical priorities that that the city is dealing with. Some of these include, just with regards to some of the increased technology issues, the risks of cybersecurity. So we're having to add some additional capacity into our IT department, and then some other priority initiatives that are needing to just bring the city forward. So the sum of all of those things total about $5.7 million, and that was really the challenge of how do we go about addressing this shortfall going into 2022. So in terms of some of the strategies that we're looking at and are going to be considered as part of this budget process is really making use of the COVID-19 grant. So this is the Restart grant that was provided by the province several years ago. Also looking at how we phase in this impact across future years, and that could be done by making use of some of the reserves that the city has, and then also recognizing that we'll be seeing a gradual return to the pre-COVID levels, and in the meantime, really looking at how we can contain the costs that we are dealing with and managing those in the best way possible, and then also looking at different revenue generating opportunities, whether it's enhancing or strengthening some of our revenue sources, or looking at new sources. And as we have done in the past, and we will continue to do, is always seeking funding opportunities to deal with the costs that the city is facing. So when we look at our city reserves, and I know there's been a lot of discussion in terms of the city has healthy reserves, and we do. As of December 31st, 2020, we have about $106 million in reserves. Just providing a little bit of a breakdown of those, there's about $28 million in statutory reserves. There's another $19 million in reserves held for development cost charges that we have collected. There's about just under $37 million in utility reserves. And then we have some other restricted reserves, such as the COVID funds, Recycle BC. And so when we look at setting aside those ones that have some restrictions on them, there's about $18 million in reserves that we could consider for how we see things funded in the coming year. And just sort of breaking that $18 million down a little bit further, these are some of the reserves that are contained within that bundle. So we have our financial stabilization reserve, gaming reserve, investment income, our surplus, general surplus. And then there's some others specifically set aside for some of our assets, such as our asset emergencies, other capital needs, and then there's some other reserves. And it's really those top four that are really probably the most prevalent, or the ones that we would want to turn to and use for this intended purpose, to sort of bridge things through as we're dealing with these extremely high costs in the coming year. So turning to our capital, the 2022 capital investment is proposed at $46.8 million, and you can see the distribution of it. The water utility, a little over $11 million, the sewer utility also $11 million, our electrical utility about $8 million, and then our general engineering about $8.9 million. This level of capital spending is up dramatically from what we normally spend. We're spending anywhere between $16 to $20 million normally on our capital needs. And based upon some significant projects that are coming on stream, we're proposing to move forward on those projects for a couple of reasons. One is at this point in time, interest rates are very attractive, so our ability to borrow money is very low. And then secondly, in terms of the city's debt levels are very attractive as well. So we've been paying our debt down over the last number of years, and so the levels of debt are in a very, very favorable position for the city to take on further debt to address some of these capital needs. And so really that's part of the basis upon how we've been able to propose a more significant capital investment plan over the coming years. And so really expanding beyond our traditional funding sources and taking on debt to address some of the aging infrastructure and some of the needs that exist. And as you can see, over the next few years, we're looking to borrow about $34 million. Certainly in 2022, what is included in the proposed plan is to borrow a little over $16 million. You can see the distribution that water makes up a large portion of it, as does general, and then a lesser portion for the sewer utility. Turning to our utilities, and I know this is certainly an area of interest for many. And earlier in fall, staff did bring forward the proposed fees and charges for our utilities. And at that point in time, council wasn't comfortable with setting the utility rates, and instead they deferred setting utility rates to the budget deliberations. And so next week when council meets and reviews the budget and deliberates on matters, it'll be during that time that they'll be setting the utility rates. However, for the draft budget that we have put forward for council's consideration, it does build in the proposed increases that you can see on the screen. So electrical 2%, the sanitary sewer at 2%, water at 0.6%, and the stormwater at 25.3%. So turning to electrical, because I know this is certainly an area where there is lots of discussion. The electrical utility does have a fairly healthy surplus. And so what has the city done just with regards to rates for the electrical utility? Well, rates have not increased for the past 5 years. So between 2017 and 2020, council approved a 0% rate increase for electric rates. And then, excuse me, in 2021, council approved a 3% rate reduction, as well as approving the 10% prompt payment discount, and really, eliminating that. So it effectively provided the 10% discount to not only those that pay on time, but also those that don't. So all rate payers were afforded the 10% discount. So certainly rates have been kept in check in the electrical utility over the past number of years. But just with some of the upcoming projects, the recommendation that the staff had put forward was a 2% for 2022. So then turning to taxation. As everyone has heard, the draft budget does include a 8.5% tax increase, and this is really the starting point for council to consider and deliberate the budget. And as you can see, the breakdown there, about 4.1% of that increase really relates to inflation. So we are being faced with some extremely high inflation rates that we have not seen in many years. And then the further increase is attributable to the community safety priority, so about 4.4%. And this proposed 8.5% tax increase does already include or contemplate using the COVID Restart Grant of about $2.4 million, which would equate to about a 7% in terms of taxation. And certainly, I think the discussion and the deliberations and the decisions that council will be making next week is just with regards to how much of this would be paid at this point via tax increase versus sort of deferred into future years, and certainly depending upon where the city's revenues go with regards to recoveries. That's certainly one thing that's going to be considered. But anything that essentially we buy now and need to pay for it will result in some sort of deferral of these rates. So there will be an impact into the future years if things are deferred. So just from a overall tax competitiveness perspective, when we compare the city of Penticton for a typical house compared to one in West Kelowna, Summerland, Kelowna, or Vernon. So when we look at our residential taxes and other charges, the city of Penticton is very competitive. In fact, comparing ourselves to these 4 other municipalities, we are the lowest of those 4. We also do recognize, though, that the median income in Penticton is lower than these other municipalities as well, based upon the 2016 Stats Canada census. So what does this mean to residents? If we were to look at the proposed tax increase along with the other utility rate increases, it would equate to $185 for an average household, which would translate to about $15 more per month. Turning to the business community, and something that council has been looking at and has been slowly making adjustments is just with regards to the business tax multiplier and how we compare to other municipalities. And as you can see on the screen, that Penticton does have a very competitive climate. So over the past several years, the multiplier has been slowly adjusted upwards. And so in 2021, it was set at 1.91. And following through on council's direction to move it to a 2.0. The 2022 draft budget does contemplate making that final step. And even with that, you can see with a multiplier of 2.0, Penticton still continues to be very competitive when we look at Summerland, Kelowna, West Kelowna, and Vernon. And you can see the comparison average across the valley, which is this line here. And if you look at provincially, this is where the multiplier sits provincially. So even with these very moderate increases, we do remain very competitive. One of the other questions that's come up and commented on and saying, well, the business tax multiplier is not a very good mechanism to sort of look at the distribution of taxes or the tax burden between residents and businesses. And so another way to look at this is through this chart. And the red and the orange aspects of the bar really reflect the assessment base within each of the communities that we're comparing ourselves to. So you can see in Penticton, our residential assessment base makes up about 85% of our overall tax base, and the non-residential assessment, essentially business, makes up about 15%. And through the use of the multiplier, we actually shift the burden slightly. So you can see that although residents make up 85% of the assessment, they are paying about 73% of the tax burden. So that's where we're actually shifting a little bit more to the business community. And you can see how we compare to the other mid-size municipalities across the valley. When you look at Vernon has a fairly significant shift, shifting about 20 points from 86 down to 66. West Kelowna is a little bit lower at about 9. So, with Penticton shifting about 12 points, we're sort of in the middle of the pack with regards to shifting a little bit more of the tax burden from residents to business. So certainly kind of within sort of the middle of the pack, just with regards to that shift that is occurring. So, what does this mean for a typical business? So, typical business with between our proposed tax increase and the utility increases, it would equate to about a little over $1,300 annually for an average business, and this would equate to about $113 per month. So with that wraps up my presentation, and we can certainly open it up for any questions that anyone has. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we can move to the chat function then.
Thanks so much for that, Jim. And yeah, you kept that really tight so that we have lots of time to talk. And so thank you to everyone who's starting to put their questions into the chat function. Our first question comes from Rick Thorpe. And I don't know if you want to address the group with this one, Rick. You're curious about whether the city is just accepting inflation. And I guess that's suggesting that we don't need as significant an increase in order to address inflation. Thoughts on that, city staff?
Can I say, do you want me to say something?
Sure, go ahead, Rick. Yeah, go ahead.
When I read through the financial plan and the corporate business plan, the drafts, I was concerned that why stuff was going up. It was just said because of inflation. So to me, and I heard this the same thing last year, to me, this means that senior staff and perhaps council too are just accepting that inflation happens. Well, if you're a family, you don't get the right just to pass things on. You have to make choices. When you're a small business, you don't just get the right to pass things on. You have to make choices. And I'm just wondering if the city and senior staff and council are not just passing stuff through, are they just not making some of the tough decisions that have to be made so that seniors on fixed incomes, families that are struggling, small business that are just hanging on aren't going to be faced with these increases? Thank you.
So I'll start by responding to that. I think that's an absolute valid question, and something that we certainly do, Rick, is we are looking at how we can be delivering our services in more innovative ways, in better ways. I'm always looking at finding efficiency. So those are things that we are doing, and we are really trying to make the best use of every taxpayer's dollars, but unfortunately and inevitably, some of these increases, there's nothing that we can do. We have collective agreements with our unions and are required to be paying paying our staff more based upon those rates. So we do what we can to try to minimize cost increases, but inevitably, I think as any of us see, whether it's personally or otherwise, costs are inevitably going up, and we do what we can to be as efficient as possible, but we are unfortunately having to look at at increases just to deal with those collective agreement commitments that have been made.
Okay, thanks for that. Our next question comes from, and I should just note that we are taking notes on all of this, so it will be shared with council, your comments in their entirety. And so our next question comes from James, and he's just curious if we're anticipating a fare increase for transit in this next year's budget.
I don't have that information in front of me. I don't believe that there are any rate increases anticipated, but I don't think. I see Angela, you're nodding your head no, so you can maybe just confirm that that's the case.
Sure, thanks, Jim. I don't believe we amended anything to do with the transit and the fees and charges. It would be the same as the previous year.
Okay.
Great, thanks for that. And so we have another question coming from Rick, and he's curious about expanding investing in safe multimodal transportation, including the lake-to-lake route. So the cost that's included in the budget is proposed to be 4.7 million, and he's curious if that includes a contingent of 41% similar to phase 1, and where is the funding coming from?
So in terms of, I don't have the details just with regards to what all is comprised of the $4.7 million, Rick. But in terms of what that figure does include is it is for I think it's phase I believe it's phase 2 or section 2 of the lake-to-lake route. With regards to the funding source and where that's coming from, currently right now the plan is contemplating that we would be internally borrowing. So essentially we would be borrowing from the electrical reserve and then paying that back over a set period of time. However, similar to with the first phase of the bike lane, there was significant grant funding that was secured, and that might be could be something that would be explored and looked at. There's a number of different grant programs for sort of active transportation, and so certainly if we're able to secure some of those grants, that certainly would go towards funding the next portion of the route.
Great, thanks for that. And I don't know if any other staff members want to jump in on that one. Donnie, I see you're unmuted.
Donnie?
I have a few thoughts, but I'm mindful of time and the amount of questions that are there. But I would just say to be, I guess, a direct answer to your question, Rick, is the 4.7 million in the draft budget is not conditional upon receiving a grant. However, I am aware that is something council will be discussing during their budget deliberations on the 22nd and 23rd, what sort of conditions they may wish or not wish to impart upon that capital commitment. So.
Okay, and I don't know if we want to address the contingency. My understanding is that there is a contingency, but I'm not sure where the 41% comes from. That wasn't my understanding of what the amount was.
And that might be something that I was going to say next week when we present the infrastructure division budget. And I know Ian Chapman, our acting general manager of infrastructure, will be speaking about the capital projects, and he probably will be in a better position to sort of get into the details of the project at that point in time.
Great, thanks. Okay, and Rick has another question on a completely different subject, so we're going to take that one as well. And so he's inquiring about on page 6 of the business plan, saying that there's a plan for a community safety review budgeted for $75,000. He'd like to know a little more about what it is and when it'll be done.
Okay, do you want me to answer that, or Donnie, did you want to jump in on that one?
I think probably the shortest answer is following council's emergency meeting on RCMP resourcing, where they approved 2 new officers immediately. They also committed to undertake a public safety review to find out what the true required level of officers are, as well as as well as delve into perhaps some bylaw support, as well as fire department support as well as part of that public safety review. I should note that some of the work on the fire department's already been completed in terms of it already exists. So the majority of those funds for the $75,000 are RCMP and bylaw related. And so we've got an independent expert that we've recently gone out to RFP to identify. His name eludes me, but he's among the best in the province at these sort of things. So we'll be able to provide a really accurate picture to council and the community on what we need to do in the long term around the RCMP and bylaw, as well as verify what's required from a fire department perspective. And when will it be completed? As soon as practical. But I think because we want to make sure we have a public engagement, I would suggest we're sort of at the midway point of next year. This budget will be done without having those details, just in an interim measures basis. And I think council's heard from Superintendent Hunter on multiple occasions about what he feels he may need. And I think he's also looking forward to the review to have some of those details verified by an independent party.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so our next question is a great, just informational question coming from Bridget. Bridget would like us to explain what we mean by capital investment.
Okay, so Bridget, what we mean by capital investment is this is really capital spending. So this is money that we are spending on our various infrastructure items. So this could include our facilities, our roads, our water, our wastewater treatment plant, and it's really items that we're spending on something that's going to be able to serve the community for many years to come. And so, although sometimes we will refer to it as capital expenses, we also refer to it as capital investment because we see it as an investment that is going to provide benefit to the community for many years to come. So hopefully that provides a little bit more clarity in terms of what you're asking about there. Okay, good. See the thumbs up. Thanks, Bridget.
Great. Okay, our next question comes from Hector, and I've sent you a bit of a message for clarification if I don't get your question right. But what I've read with your question is if you're looking to see an expansion in transit service through this budget. So I'm wondering if we can provide a response to that. And if I got your question wrong, Hector, please let me know in the chat. It'd be great.
So in terms of I'm going to say there's not a substantial change in transit, although I think there are some minor increases. I think into the route into Sendero Canyon and a few others. And I know Donnie, you're nodding your head. You might be a little bit more. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know there were some minor increases, but I don't have all of those details. I'm not sure if you've got a few more.
That's correct, Jim. You've outlined it. There was a small enhancement to service into the Sendero Canyon and Ridge area, and that's been longstanding, sort of up the Lawrence corridor as part of that development. And then, of course, there's an ongoing, or there will be a transit review conducted actually by BC Transit in coordination with the city beginning next year.
Okay.
Great, thanks for that. So Rick's got another question in the queue, but it's one we receive a lot. So I think it's a really good one for us to tackle here. And so Rick's question is that he's suggesting that we routinely overcharge for electrical in the past years, and that this is an indirect form of taxation. He's suggesting that there's no need for a tax increase or funding extra RCMP officers. And then he's also suggesting that the numbers that we're proposing to increase our RCMP officers to is still short, and he'd love to see Penticton be more aggressive and go for another 5 officers using the surplus or the extra reserves in the electrical, or the funds in the electrical reserves. So if I got that right, please, Jim, jump in there, or the appropriate staff member.
Okay, well, it's certainly a very filled question with a number of different items there. And I was just trying to find it in the chat so I could sort of take a look at it to make sure I cover everything. So, I think just with regards to electrical rates, and as I outlined in the presentation, the rates have not increased for the last 5 years, and we did see a 3% decrease last year. And certainly in terms of setting electrical rates is something that is challenging. There are some uncertainties and some variables for us. Certainly the biggest thing that impacts our costs on the electrical utility is the cost of power that we purchase from Fortis. And what happens is they normally are identifying what their proposed rate increases are prior to setting the budget, and we don't find out until after our budget is set what those actual rates are, and so that does play into that a little bit. However, I think in more recent years, we have been making some changes just with regards to how we do our revenue forecasting for the electrical utility, and really become more accurate in that regards. I think just as a result of maybe some of these differences, it has I'll say caused a more sizable surplus with regards to the electrical utility, which I think does put the city in a very favorable position financially, and certainly we're certainly turning to that reserve as a funding source to be borrowing for a number of the sizable capital projects that we have in the coming years. So it is going to provide some benefit to the community, that it's a very cost-effective borrowing source to be able to move forward on some of the projects that that are required in the city just to deal with growth, etc. So I think that covers some of it, and I'm not sure if there's some other remaining questions that need to still be answered here, Joanne.
I would just offer, there's also a question in there about the numbers of RCMP officers and Penticton continuing or Penticton being under what's required.
Yeah, and this sort of goes back to this public safety review, because I think, when council was discussing adding additional officers, the biggest question was, what is that, that figure? And, when the discussion was taking place with regards to, adding 5 officers, there's some uncertainty in terms of is 5 enough, or what that is. And I think through the public safety review, I think that will help to identify what that number should be. Once that's identified, then the next step would be determining, how we start moving towards that level, and securing the the necessary sustainable ongoing funding to achieve that.
Great. Okay, and so Rick, we can circle back if we've missed any of your questions in there. We do have a new question coming from Lynn Jackson. It's kind of spread over 2 comments in the chat. And so Lynn is just observing that it's double the capital expenditures from previous years. Is that very ambitious? And what steps have been taken to ensure staff capacity exists to manage such a large increase in capital projects?
That's an excellent question, and certainly I think not only increasing the funding, but you're bang on in terms of our internal staffing capacity to deal with those, and certainly that's something that we're looking at. And I think, as you would have seen in the chart, there's a number of different projects across a number of different areas. So in our water utility, in our sewer utility, and then also in the general utility. So that's certainly something that that we're mindful of, that it is being spread across a number of departments. That being said, I think one of the things that we have seen and that we've recognized is the city has recently hired an additional or a new city engineer. And we still have our existing city engineer on staff. I know he I think is intending to retire sometime in the over the next few years. And so having additional capacity in our engineering department to deal with some of these additional projects. So having two top-notch engineers that can be overseeing these projects is going to be hugely valuable for the city to move forward on these projects.
Great, thanks for that, and thanks for your question, Lynn. Our next question comes from Lila Parsons, talking about development cost charges. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jim to explain what development cost charges are and respond to Lila's question about why they've only been raised 1% for 15 years. I'll have to take your word for that, and how that compares with property tax increases and utility increases, and why hasn't it been increased so that we could have used those funds for some of our capital projects.
Okay, well, thanks, Joanne. Great question, Lila. So development cost charges are a charge that the city imposes upon developers when they are developing new properties. And so it's something that we collect, and then we use those funds to help deal with the growth and additional costs associated with building out further city infrastructure. And so the last time that the city did increase its DCCs, as they're often referred to, was back in 2007. And so work has been underway to increase those. And initially, what was determined is that there should be an increase of somewhere in the neighborhood of 40%. But through further discussions, council discussed that until we complete a thorough and comprehensive review, weren't quite sure whether that was the appropriate amount. And so there was discussions that ensued in terms of, do we raise this by 25% or some other figure. And what was determined was that we would raise those by 15% while we completed the DCC review, which is ongoing and is now set to be completed by next spring. And so, I think in terms of the 1% per year, this is, I think, Lila, how you've determined that in the last 15 years, it's gone up by 15%, which equates to 1% per year. And certainly, I think when we conclude this review, I think there will be a better understanding in terms of what that rate increase should be, and then hopefully we can get the proper rates set. So that way we are, I'll say, collecting our, the appropriate share from developers. I know Councillor Rieger, this is something that is near and dear to him, and has been quite watching it closely and anxious for staff to get this review done as quickly as possible.
Great, thanks for that. And I see, so Rick has shared a comment with the group, just questioning whether or not some of the increases that are proposed should be considered minimal, or they're not necessarily minimal to many residents. The next question comes from Kim Palmer, and Kim is asking if the average house price that we've used in our charts is accurate. Seems out of date given the current market.
Yeah, and that's, I couldn't disagree with that at all. We use I'll say the average price that BC Assessment provides, and it actually dates back to the previous July. So it's really over a year old, in that it is not really up to date with the current market conditions. So unfortunately, that's the best data that we have, and that's what we refer back to, just because there's no, I'm going to say, solid sort of market figure that we could use when we're referring to this. But it's a very, very valid point that there's just a lag from the information that we receive from BC Assessment to what the current market conditions are.
Great, thanks for that. And the next comment, so Rick expands on his comment about the increases not being minimal for seniors on fixed incomes and families and small business. Definitely feedback we can bring back to council. Our next question comes from Corey Easton. I think that's how you might say your last name. And so Corey asks, so you mentioned the addition of community safety officers, and can you expand on this? So she wants to know, what is the job of the community safety officers? What's the plan there? She's also wondering if there's a team in place specific to not only educate our public on crime prevention, but engaging with our vulnerable public with education and directing them to all of the free resources that are available to them.
Okay, so maybe I'll answer the the first part of this in terms of the community safety officers are in our bylaw services. We have sort of two types of officers. We have our bylaw officers that deal with the normal bylaw infractions. Whether it be parking infractions, whether it be other infractions that property owners would be faced with, and so that's sort of one group of officers. Then we also have community safety officers that are dealing quite closely, working quite closely with some of those vulnerable people out in the community, and really helping them to I guess obtain the necessary access to different programs, and also when they are making or sort of causing disruptions in the community, they would be the individuals that may be called upon to deal with those if they can. If things escalate and become much more serious, and there's risks of violence, then certainly RCMP members would be called in. So they're dealing with the community safety officers are dealing with more of the some of the more vulnerable individuals in our community than what all of our bylaw officers would be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Just with regards to the level of public education, I can't comment quite as much on that. I'm not sure, Donnie, if you've got any insights you can share, and if not, that might be a question we can take away for our bylaw services supervisor.
Yeah, you hit it right on, Jim. The community safety officers are working with the community's most vulnerable population, the most street entrenched population. Tactically speaking, they work 10-hour shifts, 4 days a week. They start early in the morning and go till the early evening. 2 more community safety officers would allow us to run 7 days a week on that program. And these safety officers are, I think, an excellent resource for our community. I know in terms of both the clients they help and assist, but also the business owners and residents that frequently call them. So this would allow us to go to a 7-day-a-week program on community safety officers. So, but will be, and is included in the draft budget, and something council will have to consider during their deliberations. And to the point around education, that is very much within their purviews and role as community safety officers. They know individuals by name. They are very well connected and very well resourced in terms of allowing people to find the help they need.
Thanks for that. And we're going to keep soldiering on and answering these questions. But I noticed that, and Corey's last statement is that, the city's safety is of the utmost importance to me while helping those in need. And so this budget, the number one priority for this budget is community safety. And we'd sure love to hear from this group on if we're hitting the mark with the recommendations that we're putting forward. Are you supportive of them? Or is there something else that you'd like to see? So feel free to enter your thoughts in the chat as well on where this budget is headed and the initiatives that it's supporting. Okay, our next question comes from Bonnie, or it may be more of a comment on just questioning whether or not we should be looking at a multi-million-dollar bike lane right now if we're looking at having to borrow money to help fund it. And maybe you could explain the funding approach for the second section of the bike route.
Okay, Thanks, Joanne. So yeah, what is included in the draft plan is to borrow money from our electrical reserve to construct that immediately, and then over the a period of time into the future, those funds would be paid back. And so certainly we would look at the appropriate funding source for those to be paid back. The advantage of borrowing from our own reserve is that we are not having to pay interest rates on that. So that's certainly one of the advantages of doing that. And then as Donnie had mentioned a little bit earlier on, when council discusses this project, they may have some discussion just with regards to some conditions around grants and the need to secure grants, just to help defray and minimize some of the costs to the community. So at this point in time, how it's proposed or included in the plan is that we would fully borrow, but certainly, council may wish to alter that and come up with a strategy where it would we would look to have some of that funded through grants.
Thanks for that, Jim, and thanks for the question, Bonnie. So Laverne is asking a question that I think that we've kind of addressed a bit, but I think it is valuable to say again. And so she's just curious about the cost comparison between bylaw, community policing, and RCMP. If we've done the cost comparison in order to kind of minimize costs.
Yeah, and I'll maybe start by answering it, because it's probably a little bit more of a sort of a complex response. When we look at a bylaw officer, their level of training, their level of I'll say authority versus as we move to a community to a community safety officer and then to a RCMP increases. So a bylaw officer, a community safety officer is not able to deal with criminal code, dealing with violent situations, and so those individuals are paid at a lower rate. If we look at an RCMP officer, the city's cost for an RCMP officer is about I think it's about $194,000 now with the latest settlement. That's about 90% of the full cost of an officer. So and that's their wages, their benefits, and all the equipment that comes with it. So an RCMP member is certainly much more expensive, but they have much more training and are able to deal with much more serious matters in the community. And certainly, I think finding the right mix of different these different officers, the bylaw officers being much I'll say or less expensive than an RCMP member. It's really determining what is the need that exists within our community to deal with the community safety issues. So in some cases, it may work to have bylaw officers dealing with some of these situations, or perhaps a community safety officer. In other cases, we need more significantly trained RCMP officers to deal with some of the more serious and significant issues. So sort of looking at that mix is certainly something that needs to be done. I think the public safety review that's that we are embarking upon is going to help guide the city just in terms of determining what is that appropriate mix.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Jim. And so Dale is asking if there was any effort to curb spending, including minimizing capital projects, or are we just looking at the tax increase?
Okay, well, I'll maybe take a first crack at that. In terms of when we look at our capital projects, many of these are based upon, we have aging infrastructure. If we don't take steps to fix those up, we're going to have I'll say service interruption or service degradation in the community. And so when we look at some of the major capital projects, upgrading some of our equipment at our water treatment plant, our wastewater treatment plant, those are absolutely critical and necessary if we want to continue to be providing safe drinking water to the community, being able to process the sewage that the city has to contend with. So we're looking at what needs to be done, what can be deferred into the future, which parts of our infrastructure can continue to last for a period somewhat longer. So that's kind of how we approach what we do in terms of approaching our capital projects. When we look at our overall operating expenses, we are always looking at how we can be the most cost effective, how we can find efficiencies, how we can be innovative. So those are things that that each department manager is undertaking and is doing, not only during budget time but also throughout the course of the year. When we did have some conversations just with regards to should we be looking at cutting our budgets, that very quickly translates to a reduction in service. So, if we're going to reduce the amount that we're spending, it's going to translate to service reductions. And certainly last year when we went out to the community and we surveyed the community, just with regards to what are their expectations, what we heard is that there was a willingness from the community to continue to be paying what they're paying, and in some cases pay a little bit more to receive that same level of service. And certainly over the past year, we've seen that when it comes to the cleanliness of our parks, the upkeep of our beaches, that there is an expectation that we have those at a certain standard. So it is really based upon the expectations of those standards within the community that we felt that maintaining those service levels, and in some cases I think with our parks looking at some actual enhancements just with regards to the cleanliness is something that is expected by the community. But certainly in terms of if that's something that council will be able to discuss and debate as we go through the details of the budget next week.
Jim, do you mind if I just tag on for just a moment on that, which is just to share that if you look at a couple of maybe 3 or 4 points, so I'll go quick. The first is coming out of the pandemic, and I know in the last about a year ago, we reviewed our organization. Actually, I guess it would be about 18 months ago, top to bottom, to look to find efficiencies, reduced our management headcount by 10%, reduced the size of the senior leadership team. We also have the entire organization, for myself, throughout the organization, come December 24th, we take between 3 and 4 unpaid days off, all the way to the first business day of the new year. That doesn't include people who plow the snow or firefighters or RCMP. But if it's possible, you take that time unpaid off, and that saves over $100,000. Like I said, we've reduced management by about 10% in that time. If you look at our non-public safety staff, so this year we have 1 non-public safety member staff. That's an IT person, which COVID has taught us is extremely valuable. But we've also reduced last year, it was 5 positions that were non-public safety. Further, if you look at the way we manage the city following the passing of a budget, you'll note that we're often leaving a small surplus under budget because we try to manage as best we can, even after the budget is passed. So any chance to find savings. As it relates to engineering, I can share that our engineers, Mr. Chapman, Mr. Figgett, Ms. Patet, I mean, they're working. I got off the phone with Ian Chapman at 6:50. He was still at the office tonight. They work. It's not that they work exceptionally, it's just that there's a lot of projects. The question about our capital projects, if we don't have the engineers on staff with the institutional knowledge, we tend to hire consultants, and those consultants or outside engineers tend in many cases to actually cost taxpayers more. So, but by all means, if there's not a need, and Joanne and Jim and Angela can attest to this, I mean, we run pretty lean, and especially at the exempt level, if there's not work, we tend not to we tend not to have those positions. And we have gone through in the past, in the recent past, and shown that if there's not appropriate work, we no longer have those positions and those staff. So just wanted to highlight that we try to run a very efficient on behalf of taxpayers. And also saw the question about the extra engineer as well. So I hope that helps, just to know that we're really keeping our eye on the ball on behalf of taxpayers.
I think that question came from Ian Chapman.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, our next question is, I'm going to ask Jim to see if we need more detail from Laverne. So Laverne is asking, or she's saying that her strata has been hit with a steep increase in water and sewer, and she's curious if there's a benefit to the city to move to group these costs as opposed to charging individual property owners. Do you understand what she's intending there? If not, we can have her unmute and share her thoughts.
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind just getting a few more details, just because I'm not sure that I've got enough information to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, Laverne, if you're available to unmute yourself. Oh, there you are. Perfect. The floor is yours, Laverne.
Oh, no, I just, in the last several years, we have a corporate bill from the city, and in the past, it wasn't there. And so those fees were charged on our property tax as individual property owners. So I'm not positive. For me, it is an increased cost personally based on my living situation. I was just curious as these fees are poised to increase yet again, and why they're spread out over a community or a group property versus an individual owner. I just don't understand why.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I don't have enough of maybe an understanding, and this might be something, Laverne, that we need to take offline and sort of look at the specific strata that you're part of to sort of understand what has actually changed there. So that might be something that would be maybe more beneficial for us to take that offline to sort of understand that specific situation, because I'm not sure what would be happening there. So unless,
Yeah.
Angela, would you have any insights off the top of your head, or no?
No, I'm not sure, Laverne, if you're sort of talking about the fact that we charge based on consumption. Is that what you're referring to?
It is somewhat on consumption. That's when our rates started to really rise. It's more speaking on behalf. We've got an increasing presence of strata properties in the city, and I'm just wanting to understand the rationale and the basis for how our stratas are charged. So I can certainly follow up. It's a complex question.
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up with someone from the city. Thank you.
Okay.
Maybe you could try calling reception tomorrow, and who should she speak to, do you think, Angela? Would it be is it Sabrina or?
Yes, it would be Sabrina. She's the new revenue supervisor. She's pretty new, so she might have to look into that for you. But if you give her the details, we can dig into it for you, Laverne.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is I think that we have spent some time referring or discussing this. It comes from Amelia, and just she's offering a feedback that people that she's spoken to believe that the decision to hire only 3 officers is a half measure at best, and that we are falling short if you use the provincial average. And she's curious if the analysis has been done that shows the bylaw increase offsets this shortfall. So I do. So that's one part of the question. And then the next question is, should we be making the substantial infrastructure investment at a time when policing and safety could still benefit from greater investment? I think that's probably the question that council wrestles with.
Well, yeah, and the one comment I'd make just with regards to, and this is, I think this is a challenge that council will definitely have to wrestle with at budget, is many of these things, there's a multitude of different needs in different areas of the city, and it's difficult to say, well, should we do this or should we do that? And so, there are needs in a number of our areas, just with regards to, some of our infrastructure is aging and is getting to a point where there's risk of it failing. And so if we don't take steps to invest and replace some of those components, there's risks to that. And so that's what I was saying in terms of, well, we're trying to look at that and sort of maybe come forward with a balanced approach that, dealing with the community safety issues, hiring additional officers, increasing bylaw services hours, et cetera, while also undertaking some of this capital investment. So I think there is a little bit of trying to maintain a balance. But back to the initial point in terms of, are 3 officers enough? I think that's really where this community safety review will help to establish what is the right number that Penticton needs to start working towards and going from there. So certainly looking at the provincial average, to hire 50 or 60 more officers, that would be more than doubling what we currently have, and that would come at a very, very significant financial price. And so I think in terms of the review, will help provide some guidance just with regards to, what might be an appropriate level, and then what might be some other considerations that the city might undertake to deal with some of these very significant issues that we're facing.
Thank you, Jim. And so our next question or comment comes from James Brown. He'd like to see expanded transit service, more a night route on Sundays. Some of the church meetings that he goes to at 7. We've definitely heard there's interest in better night service, and I think we've talked before about the SOEC. And so I understand there is a transit report coming to council. I haven't read the details myself, but I am aware that there is an engagement process coming up too. So all of these great comments on transit should definitely be captured in that process as well.
And yes, Joanne, if I may comment, I mentioned at the previous council meeting during question period that we need more buses on the daytime routes, especially on the numbers 1, 3, 4, and 5 and 2 routes, because we're getting a lot more wheelchairs, including myself, and a lot of walkers and strollers now, and those small little grocery carts coming on the bus, and it's really crowding up the priority seating area. And I've been refused entry on the bus by a couple of drivers because of this issue.
Oh my. Okay, well, thanks for that, James. I've written that down, the more buses on the routes you mentioned, 1, 3, 4, and 5, and that we're seeing more wheelchairs and walkers and such that are taking up capacity. I'm thrilled to hear that there are people using the transit service. That's excellent. Okay.
And also the number 16 route, especially on Sundays, the numbers 5 and 16, they get used to quite a lot, and the drivers are seeing a lot more wheelchairs and walkers on that route, on those routes on Sundays, and then in any other time of the week because the infrequency of the Sunday routes. So that's my thoughts on it.
Appreciate that, James. And like I said, I've got it written down and I'll be sharing that with Anthony tomorrow. Okay. So I think Rick's referring to the safety review, which I believe was discussed or Donnie mentioned. And I've written down the feedback that Rick would like to see it made a priority and to get a date for it. So Dale has asked if he's suggesting that the other comparisons to other OK cities are helpful. What is their proposed tax rate increase? Surely they're facing the same circumstances. And I guess he's looked at the Vancouver rate, which is proposing a 3.5%. Did you want to discuss at all how we choose our comparisons and what's meaningful?
Yeah, so we're normally looking or maybe comparing ourselves to the other mid-sized municipalities within the valley. So this would be West Kelowna, Kelowna, and Vernon. Those are probably some of our normal comparators for many of the things that we do look at. In some cases, we'll look at other mid-sized municipalities elsewhere. Sometimes we will refer ourselves to or compare ourselves to Mission. In the Lower Mainland and some out on the island, such as I'm just drawing a blank on some of the others. But something I was going to comment on is tax increases. It's always very difficult for us to get a full sort of a full grouping of tax increases because different municipalities sort of have different timelines with regards to their budget processes. And certainly that's something that we can endeavor to see what other municipalities are proposing for when we introduce things to council next week. Something I can say though is in the past week I did see that the city of Vernon, a little further up north of us here, was proposing an 8% increase as well. So certainly one of our comparators is certainly in the same ballpark as where Penticton is at. So I would say we're not alone in terms of having a little bit of a higher, at least a higher starting point tax rate increase.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, and I think we're cooking along. We've got 10 minutes left. And so if you have to leave us at in 10 minutes, totally understand. Thank you so much for joining us. We will stay on the line for about another 15 minutes just to continue to answer these questions. So thanks everyone for participating tonight. The next question is, Rick's curious if we would agree to a full external review of utility rates or perhaps having BC UC do the review.
What I can comment on, I couldn't comment in terms of what we would do into the future, but what we have, what the city traditionally does is it undertakes a utility rate review every 3 to 4 years. I think the next review is planned for 2023, and that is normally made up of staff to provide information, but also a number of I'll say external experts from within the community, and then we will bring sort of expert assistance in to help with that as well. So the last one was completed, I believe, is in 2019, and then the next one we will complete is in 2023. So there is a regular process that we do to review our rates, and I think part of it will be guiding sort of what that next review that's proposed in 2023 would look like, and how it would be sort of comprised of the necessary experts.
Great, thank you. Okay, so yeah, so keep your eyes peeled for opportunities to get involved in that process. So our next comment comes from Lori Goldman, who is suggesting that as electrical rates keep increasing, we're at a perfect time to consider helping residents through rebates or grants to install more solar grids to benefit city utilities. That's great feedback that we can certainly keep in this process, and we will be talking about our climate action plan at tomorrow's council meeting. So Dale's questioning the cost of maintaining 2 engineers at full salary for the next 2 years, and why do we require this? And I'll let you answer that, Jim.
Okay, yeah, I think this
Or
sort of
Donnie.
goes back to, yeah, I'll make an initial comment and then pass it over to Donnie. I think part of it is, as you see, a sizable increase in our capital investment program, and the need to have expertise to be able to manage and guide those projects forward. And so certainly, there's a high demand. Our engineering department is really stretched considerably just with regards to the number of projects that they're having to manage and move forward. And so I think that's part of what we're really needing to do. The other aspect I was going to say is that Donnie spoke about is the internal knowledge within the city, that anytime there's consideration just with regards to changing of individuals, huge corporate knowledge that's lost when people leave. And so being able to have that information kept within the city and sort of continue on from one staff to another is hugely critical for the success of maintaining the city. So Donnie, anything further that I may have missed there?
No, I think you hit it right on there, Jim. Just that believe me, if there wasn't work, we wouldn't have those staff. There is work and then some in that field. So, but I think you hit it right on, Jim.
Great. Okay, just to keep things moving, if there are comments in there that are simply comments, please everyone do follow along on the chat, and we'll focus on the questions as we endeavor to give you back your evening here. Kim Palmer's got a great question, kind of changing gears for us. She's just curious about the grants for community organizations and events, and will funding levels be maintained or reduced in this budget?
Okay, so in terms of that's a great question. So we do have a set amount that we normally will provide an award out to the various groups that are providing the great services to the community, putting on various events. I know, Angela, you probably know that number off the top of your head, and so I can maybe just sort of turn it to you. I think the one issue is, as we see increased demand from these, the amount that we can allocate to each of these organizations may change or evolve from year to year. But is it 585,000? Is my memory serving me correct here?
That's very close, Jim. It's 586 between grants and partnerships.
Okay. Good.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. There's a few more comments here.
Joanne, may I jump in here for a minute, please? Someone in the chat was asking about electric buses, and I emailed Mike Pulaski of Barry and Smith Trucking about that very issue. And right now, as far as I understand, it's not in the city's budget in this financial plan to be purchasing electric buses, but it's on the Barry and Smith's radar, and I'm pretty sure it's on the city of Penticton's radar, but I don't think they'll be coming on stream for another few years or so.
Perfect. And I think that's another one we'll see in the Community Climate Action Plan tomorrow, some recommendations around that. Okay. Let's see. So Lila's just commenting that she'd like some guarantee that the DCCs will be raised And as they've not been raised since they were reviewed on December 17th. So I think Jim did answer what the plans were around the DCC reviews. Is there any kind of nuance in here, Jim, that we need to address, or?
No, I think in terms of, having that review be completed, so that way we do know what that appropriate figure is, I think is absolutely critical. So I don't have anything further to add on that.
Well, Mr. Bauer, these development cost charges were overviewed in December 17th, 2019 meeting with Blake Laven, Acting Director of Development Services, and Joanne Klebb, Engagement Strategist, provided council with an overview on development cost charges. So these were done already. And it has to be brought up to council, these DCCs, every 2 years by the act, the BC Government Act. And so how many reviews do we need? I've just about given up on this. We need money for the city. We need money from everywhere. And there's, like Councillor Regier, he brought it up that he was on the front page of the Herald. He wanted him and Councillor Kimberly, they wanted them brought up to 40%. So how many times do we have to review it? And the councillors have all the power. So what they do is just every 2 years broke them down. So how do we have a guarantee? Do we have to, like on the next election on October 22nd, 22 next year, do we have to ask who's going to vote for them in order to vote for them? Because the councillors have all the power. So how do we win? How do the residents win here?
Jim, you want to tackle that, or Donnie?
Jim, can I just share that, Lila, I appreciate you raising this concern, and you're not, council has authorized a full review of this, which is a requirement under, and I can't quote the act, but the Minister of Municipal Affairs, or whatever their current title is, must sign any new DCC bylaw, and their staff ensure that the city has gone through a thorough and rigorous process, which they outline. And even you'll note that even the 25% increase, once council passed the 25% increase, the minister's staff took several months reviewing council's process and logic in order to get there, and then agreed to sign those DCCs into action. I completely agree that over the years, the city fell behind in reviewing these reviewing DCCs. I think if there's anything we've learned out of this and other processes, they often take a long time to do. So better start early and leave lots of time to do them, for the very reasons that the sort of processes we're undertaking tonight to ensure there's appropriate engagement. And DCCs have a legislative and regulatory framework to ensure that engagement occurs. And I should note, DCCs are really set by looking at the project. So you need to go through and determine all the projects, the future growth, take the cost out of those projects, and then divide the cost of the projects by the amount of growth. And all of this is looked at. So council has authorized staff to do it. It does fall on staff to make this a reality. We are working expeditiously. We understand the possible financial consequences, and we understand from council they want to see staff make this happen. So I think Mr. Thorpe mentioned the term warp speed earlier in the chat. We're also trying to do warp speed to the best of our abilities on this DCC review. Well,
I hope that they don't raid the electrical utility, because electrical utility, that 23 million is there for asset replacement. This is one of your papers here. 4.3 million a year. We need a Carmi substation for 1.5 million. Well, that was 2018, 2019. I don't know if that was put in.
Lila, I'm running out of time here. So
okay,
I want to make sure I get to everyone's questions.
But thank you but please don't raid that. We need that. And if you rate it, then we're going to have everything raised for our utility rates. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Lila. Appreciate that. Okay, so there's a question here about how we calculated the 4.1% needed to cover inflation, and when the government of Canada announced an inflation rate of 2.4%.
So yeah, I guess what I'd say is in terms of when we looked at the various items that we're contending with, just with regards to our labor increases, the RCMP contract, that's how we ultimately, that and some of the other cost increases that we're facing, that's how we came and landed on the 4.1%. If you look at the consumer price index in BC for the month of September on a year-over-year basis, that was actually coming in at 4.4%. So there are some other comparators that are very, very similar. But recognizing that the basket of goods that a municipality acquires versus something of an individual consumer is a little bit different, and so one can't always compare compare a municipality and the items that we're purchasing from an individual consumer. But when we looked at what's happening around us, when we looked at the specific cost increases that that we're dealing with, labor and our contracts, most specifically the RCMP contract, those are the most significant to arrive at the 4.1% that's included in the draft budget.
Hey, thanks for that, Jim. So we've got a new comment. We talked about electric buses, so we're going to move on to Anthony's comment or question here. And Anthony is curious about the key unfunded budget items that are to be discussed further at budget deliberations and that aren't currently reflected in the draft financial plan.
Okay, thanks for that, Anthony. So the budget includes all of the operating items that we have reflected are built into the budget, but the financial plan does include a number of unfunded capital projects. So these aren't necessarily being brought forward and asking council to add them in. However, through their deliberation, this provides a little bit more visibility to some of the other projects that do exist, and council would have, I guess, have their prerogative if there was a capital project that was on the unfunded list and they felt it was a priority, it could be suggested that be added into the budget, and then we would determine how we go about funding it. But at this point in time, the unfunded projects, like I said, are essentially the capital projects, and really to provide some visibility just with regards to some of the additional projects that we haven't built into the budget based upon priorities and needs, but certainly at some point in the future are needing to be considered and maybe brought forward at a future budget.
Jim, just hearing your question, probably the best way to look is on page 133 of the budget booklet. It starts with all of the unfunded projects at the bottom. And just to give you an idea, I've just got on page 136 a list of probably the most interesting stuff. There's City Hall renovation is unfunded, a Skaha Park boathouse unfunded, a replacement for the Jumbotron at the SOEC is unfunded, the Twin Arenas as per the Arena Task Force study is unfunded. You go down to the next area and you've got, I'm just looking at some of the projects here. And like I said, you can find them all starting at 133. Upgrades to the safety village, tennis court upgrades, 3 Mile Beach upgrades, all unfunded. So all the list is there at the bottom of the budget document. And should be noted that council in the past has looked at things in the unfunded item and added them to the funded item, or in the past has added them in future budget years. And I can think of a couple for this year as well that were previously unfunded, but are funded in the future. So they're there starting on page 133 all the way down.
Perfect.
Thanks, Anna.
Okay, so Bonnie's wondering if there's anything in the budget to encourage more reasonable priced housing. or in the business plans, I should say?
There is a housing needs assessment that is included in the budget. It is actually a part of our strategy and economic development strategy. And I don't have the details right at hand, but I think it's something we are very aware of. I know council's very aware of, trying to find ways to bridge the gap that we've seen really open in terms of the housing market. So stay tuned for that anyways.
Okay, great. I see people are dropping off here, so we're cooking along. So so we've got some comments / questions from Rick that you can definitely read and engage your thoughts on that. And Corey has provided some thoughts around the community focus and some more suggestions on things that we can do. So thanks for that. As I mentioned, all of these chat comments will be included in our engagement package. Brian Hughes is offering that bike lanes are a real asset, whereas our CMP expenses are wages and pensions, and with his belief that with little proven safety improvement. So Rick's asking a question about the details of a major increase in civic grants. I'm just curious, did we address that? Angela did speak to the grant program. Is there anything else we need to address on that one?
I should say there's on a year-over-year basis, there's no increase in the grants from a budget to budget, but what you might be seeing is in the 2021 forecast, that is much lower, and it's because there was a number of events that did not take place this year, and as a result, the grants were not advanced to the various organizations. So that's really why it appears as though there is a sizable increase when you look at the 2021 forecast.
Okay. And so Dale's provided further clarification around his comments on capital projects, just offering his viewpoint that we can definitely take to council. Hector, I'm going to follow up with you directly tomorrow and make sure that I get you answers to your questions. I think we need to have a conversation about it. And I think Rick has left the line, so I'll move on. So James, okay, entertainment cost. Sorry, I'm just cooking along here. I've got some direct messages. So again, questions or suggestion that maybe we need to put the lake to lake route on pause if there are shortfalls. Let me see. Sorry, I'm trucking along here. Brian, you're asking if there's talk of stabilizing DCCs throughout the province, so there isn't a race to the bottom, sort of like that which is occurring with global business rates. And that might be a bigger question than we want to tackle here. Does anyone want to talk about, are there any shifts happening in local government legislation around DCCs?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, but Donnie, you're going to say something?
Precisely that. The current DCC formula is very customized to each municipality, just based on the needs of each municipality. So I'm not aware of any shift from that approach. Okay.
And I will go through this and consolidate the transit questions and make sure that we've covered them off and share them with the group. As I truck along here. So Amelia making more comments about wanting to see a stronger safety focus, especially in light of recent unsolved murders in Penticton. And so, yeah, please do read all the comments. I think we might be getting to the end. Price we will pay. Okay, more comments coming from Bonnie and Lori. With an increased number of security, wouldn't taxes go up higher and make more people angry? We can't seem to have everything without a cost. I think that's just Lori's general kind of question or comment about the challenge that a lot of communities are facing. Sorry, folks. I just want to try and make sure I get to the questions here as I rip along. Okay. Okay, I am not seeing more questions. So if I've missed any, if as my team here kind of peruses the remaining comments, or if anyone else has a question that they think that we've missed amongst the group, please let me know in the chat, or you can unmute yourself in our last few minutes here. And just truly an amazing discussion. That was quite a lot of really informed and challenging questions. I can't thank you all enough for participating today and in this discussion. We've got some really great feedback to take back to council, and they certainly have their job cut out for them with this year's budget and in how we're going to move forward. So I'm not seeing anything else. Any final words coming from my colleagues? Jim, Donnie?
Just Joanne, to thank everyone again for taking the time tonight. I'll just see if Councillor Rieger or Mayor Vasilaki have just any closing 10-second closing comments there. Maybe Councillor Rieger, then Mayor Vasilaki.
Mayor Vasilaki here. I'm really pleased with the turnout that we had this evening. It wasn't boring at all. Most people think that talking about taxation and all those other things that municipalities have to deal with was boring as heck. But today I found it very interesting, and I learned a few things from the questions that were asked. So it's a good thing, and I try to attend as many of these events as I can in order to keep informed, and I'm sure the rest of City Council is also in the same boat. Councillor Rieger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I think it was a great meeting here, and a great diversity of opinions and focus that people have, and it shows some of the challenges that we're going to be facing as a council to deal with. Obviously, an exceedingly high tax rate proposal that's currently on the table, and yet the types of needs and costs that are causing that are, we think, pretty important too. So it's going to be a real challenge. And as a side issue, holy cow, what a nice interest to see some people had in development cost charges. I have been pushing that for 3 years, and because it is a fair process of how to help residential taxpayers, I'm not going to stop on that initiatives. It's quite an unfair arrangement when we fall behind, and the residents are left, and businesses as well are left to pick up the services that are not funded as they ought to have been according to provincial legislation. Thank you.
Okay, great. 8:45. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much. Enjoy your evenings. Oh, actually, sorry, Jim, can you share your slides one more time? I have 2 quick things to remind our remaining guests about. And that is so all of your feedback that you shared today will be included in our feedback package. But as always, you can complete our feedback form at Shape Your City. And can you go to the next slide, please, Jim?
Okay.
And this is very exciting, and I wish I had mentioned this earlier, but we do have 2 open houses planned this week. And not only will you have further opportunity to discuss the budget with staff, but you will also get the first look at the design of the Point intersection, and which is one of the major capital projects included in this year's budget, as well as the detailed design for the next section of the Lake to Lake bike route. And we'll also have staff on hand to talk to you about the North Gateway project and civic places and spaces. So we've got lots of hot topics, and you can see the dates and times, or you can come and actually speak to us in person. Hope to see you all there. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Anything else we can help you with, Amelia or PJ? All right. Okay, team. Well, we will see you all tomorrow.
Mhm.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.